think we're on air finally. Let's see. Yep, Hangout on air is live. So welcome everybody to our first ever Moves the Needle Lean Lunch. At Moves the Needle, we focus on helping enterprises to innovate more effectively by applying lean startup principles, design thinking, business modeling, et cetera, et cetera. Today we have the pleasure of a guest, Benson Garner. He is a business model expert at Strategizer, actually the company that brought the business model canvas to life. So we've got a special treat today. Really quick before we dive into letting Benson introduce himself and head first into the interview, I wanted to let everybody know about a couple upcoming things that we've got at Moves the Needle. So number one, we actually have a group session. Oh my God, I can't talk. It's gonna be a long day. Group coaching session. There we go. It's all virtual. That we've got available right now. We've still got a couple slots left for that. We're running that starting. We've got one session on Mondays and another one on Fridays. So if you need a little extra help applying Lean Startup in your enterprise, maybe breaking down barriers between teams or just getting moving quickly, we'd love the opportunity to help you get through that. And so the group coaching is a perfect opportunity for that. Coming up next week, we also have a webinar that we're going to be conducting in conjunction with Unleash WD, which really focuses on utilizing the customer Zoom tools and really, as an enterprise, how you can get super focused about your customer segment. One of the biggest problems that we have as big enterprises is actually too many customers. So sometimes that keeps you from being able to focus effectively. So we're going to help out with that. Both Brant Cooper and I will be conducting that. And then later on in June, Brant Cooper is actually off to New Zealand, Australia, and Germany for a series of 3 events out there. So he'll be doing some speaking, conducting some workshops at Agile Australia, and then conducting an advanced Lean Startup in the Enterprise workshop in Germany. So if you're interested in any of those opportunities or chances to see Brant speaking or engage with us, please either jump in on the comments or check out movestheneedle.com, where we've got on the events page, we've got all of our upcoming events listed there, and we'd love to see you out on the road. So enough of the commercials. Let's dive right into interviewing our special guest, Benson. So I'm actually going to start off by letting Benson give a little bit more background about what he does. So Benson, who are you and what do you do?
Thanks, Aaron. So as Aaron mentioned, I'm a business model designer at Strategizer. What I do there is basically put together case studies around companies that are either using the business model canvas, or we look at cool companies who have really innovated their business models and try to write up stories about that. In addition to that, I help Alexander Osterwalder design content for his workshops, for keynote speeches, for various pieces of content that we've got at Strategizer. Right now, kind of our biggest project is we're working on the next book for our companion tool to the business model canvas, the value proposition canvas. So be on the lookout for that. In fact, I think you can sign up right now on businessmodelgeneration.com. If you go there, there's a tab that says book, and you can see the various books that we've got, as well as the new book, and you can kind of get on the email newsletter to be updated when that gets released. So that's our biggest project right now. And then in addition to that, I kind of freelance consult with large corporations on the side. So business model generation is constantly getting infiltrated with requests for consulting work or speaking engagements. And when Alex or Yves or one of the other founders is unable to do it, they farm that out to other consultants like myself. And so I've spent a good bit of time working with various enterprises that have requests for consultants that know how to basically use the business model canvas and teach them how to do it within their organizations.
That sounds really exciting. I know my personal journey with the business model canvas is a little bit I don't know, it's probably pretty typical. I started using it and found it to be really valuable for being able to just document where I was and communicate progress and those kinds of things. But then, now that I've been using it for quite a while, I have this. I guess you could call it a disease where like anytime any person is talking to me about a business idea or something like that, I like mentally start putting things in the boxes and and definitely I think it may annoy some people, but in your situations, where have you seen the business model canvas really provide a lot of value in the enterprise?
So typically when we're working with an enterprise on the business model canvas, it typically generates from a strategy group or an innovation group primarily, but we've also seen it used with product managers, finance departments, and all of your typical functional departments. But primarily, we're seeing people from innovation groups or strategy groups, and where we really see a lot of value, I think primarily is basically just giving people a common language and a common framework to work within. So to date, I mean, if you think of your last strategic planning session, if you work in a large enterprise or have worked in a large enterprise, typically what you've got is a bunch of really smart people sitting around a table, and CEO or you name it, big title, says, hey, we need to think about XYZ trend that's happening in the market, or we need to talk about our strategy, or we need to talk about reinventing our business model, or about this startup that's coming in and disrupting our industry. And you have a 3-hour-long conversation, and it's kind of blah, blah, blah back and forth between all of the big talking heads at the organization, and then 3 hours later they all leave, and nobody's any better off than when they came in. And mainly that's because they don't understand each other, right? People are coming from various backgrounds, various amounts of expertise and experience, and that's really great, and it brings a lot of value to the table. But at the same time, it also becomes really confusing in that everybody's speaking a different language. So the main thing that people say, the main value that people say they get out of using the business model canvas as a tool is providing that common language to talk about business modeling and strategy at large. A lot of people say that they use the business model canvas as kind of their blueprint for strategy. So that's what I would say is probably the biggest piece of value that most organizations get out of it.
That makes sense. So just for folks that may not know necessarily what the business model canvas is, can you give a quick introduction to what it is, just in case? I suspect
Sure, yeah.
Most of the folks that are on here have that, but
Yeah.
And then secondly, to that point around strategy and how you've seen it used, can you give an example or two of how you've seen that?
Sure. So let me back up for your first question, which is basically what is the business model canvas? So the business model canvas is a one-page visual tool for describing a business model. And if you don't know what a business model is, that's fine. I think the easiest way that Alex has come up with to define it is basically it's the rationale behind how an organization goes about creating value for customers, delivering that value to customers, and then recapturing value back into the organization. So the business model canvas comprises of 9 building blocks that basically describes that entire value creation and delivery and recapture process. I believe, I can't remember exactly when they created it, but it was something like 2007, I believe, and since then there's been over 2.5 million downloads. There's been approximately 1 million copies of the book sold. There's been more than 2,000 or 3,000 people trained in various master classes and workshops. It's being used at some 250 plus universities just in the U.S. alone, and there's, I think, something like 30 or 36 different translations of the book and of the canvas as a tool being used globally. So it's pretty quickly become kind of a global phenomena, if you will, in the
Wow.
business world. in that it's probably the fastest growing, I guess the fastest growing way that we use to talk about business models, and it's pretty quickly become the standard for how we discuss and talk about business models. If you look at Google Trends, you'll see other strategy frameworks like Blue Ocean Strategy, or Porter's Five Forces, or all those types of things, and you'll see that most of those are kind of on the decline, where Business Model Canvas in the last few years has kind of surpassed all of those strategic tools and methods. So it's pretty cool. And then I forget what your second question was, Aaron. I apologize.
No worries. Yeah, you were talking about how you've seen the business model canvas really used with strategy and in the strategy teams and innovation groups, and giving that common language and framework. But I was asking if you could share a couple examples of situations where you've seen it really make a big impact as a result of being able to do that effectively.
Yeah. Okay. So I recently worked on a project with Intel. And without saying too much about the specifics of the project, basically what happened is we had an individual come to us, and he was basically tasked with defining the end-to-end strategy for an entire, basically one of their core groups within Intel. So this group has, I believe, 4 different divisions that operate underneath it, which accounts for some 250 different products.
Wow.
And however many business units that make up all those divisions. So essentially, this individual came to me and he said, "Hey, I've been tasked with defining what our end-to-end strategy is, and I don't know any better way to do it than maybe to try to use the framework of the business model canvas. But I really don't know how to do that. I've used it in the past. In fact, Alex Osterwalder has been to Intel. He's done a keynote speech, and we've seen various groups using the canvas. You've done some work here at Intel with the canvas. How can I use these tools to basically accomplish this project?" And so essentially what we set out to do, what we decided that we needed to do, was basically to take an inventory of all of the business models within this group. So that sounds like a really big task, and it actually is a really big task, and it's what we've been doing for the last several months. But essentially what we're doing is we're taking the business model canvas and looking at the business model for this group at a very high level and at an extremely detailed level. So when I say high level, I mean we're trying to define 1 or 2 kind of core business models for this entire group, but then at the same time we want to take a deep dive into each individual division, into each individual business unit, and into all of their various products, and actually sketch out the business model for each product all the way up to the highest group level. And then once we've got kind of the inventory taken, then we can actually look at those. And actually, Aaron was key in telling me how to do this, but kind of stack these up on top of each other, so to speak, and kind of take a look at where the synergies are between the various business models and try to organize around the various, like I said, the various synergies between the business models, as well as to separate on where there's differences. And then from there, from a strategic standpoint, the other piece of this puzzle is that this group has been kind of identified as being the group that's going to kind of lead Intel into the 21st century, so to speak. They're basically being tasked with 25% growth and 25% CAGR growth in the next 3 or so years for all of Intel. And so this is kind of a big deal that this group gets it right. And so with that, they know that they're not going to be able to reach that goal doing business as usual. So there's going to have to be some various innovations that take place both at the product level and at the business model level. So they're going to have to bring tons of various new products and services to market. They're going to have to totally reinvent their business models, refining existing ones, trying to get the most out of the ones that are currently working, and inventing entirely new business models. So that's one really big scenario where we've seen Business Model Canvas used as the framework for kind of visualizing what that strategy looks like.
And what would you say are some of the what are some of the issues that the team or the company is running into with taking on something that large and ambitious? I mean, I suspect that just it seems like it's just a documentation effort on the surface, but I suspect that actually there's quite a bit, as you know, things aren't just black and white as far as what you put in those boxes on the business model canvas. Things are in flux, and things like one person may view it one way versus another viewing it another. So, you know, what are some of the things that the team ran into that others might watch out for if they're trying to do something similar?
Yeah, so so like you said, it seems like just a documentation process on the surface. And in the beginning, kind of phase one of that project is somewhat a documentation process. And so what we did to kind of combat various uses and interpretations of the canvas is I went in and I trained kind of the core strategy team on the business model canvas, how to use it, to think innovatively, how to use it to document your current state business model, how to look at future state business models, and all those types of things. And then we tasked that core strategy team with doing the documentation process themselves. So in efforts to not have anything mixed up, we essentially trained a core team and sent that core team out to do the documentation. Now, once that team is finished documenting that and coming up with and kind of bringing all the pieces back together and looking at it as a whole, then what that team is going to do is they're going to identify the various places where there's opportunities for innovation, and then they're going to go out to those various areas of that group, and actually will work together to train up the innovation teams that are going to get set in place, and we'll train those teams up in both the business model canvas as well as other techniques and tools like lean startup and customer development. And some of these groups are already using agile engineering processes, some are not. Some are familiar with design thinking principles, some are not. So there's going to be a lot of work ahead of us in terms of getting these teams not just up to par with the business model canvas, but also with the other innovation techniques and tools and frameworks that are out there that can really help them and benefit them in getting to that strategic goal of 25% growth over the next 3 to 5 years. So
yeah, one of the questions I was going to ask as a follow-up is how it fits in with other methodologies like lean startup and design thinking and those kinds of things. In this case, is it not is it that would be a multiple choice question. What I want to just ask, how does it fit in?
How does it fit in? Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're on this call, you're probably familiar with some of the frameworks that I just threw out there. Customer development specifically. So if you follow and prescribe to Steve Blank basically says that the business model canvas is the scorecard for a lean startup. So if you're running a lean startup, whether in the traditional sense or at the enterprise level, basically you can look at it as each individual post-it note or sticky or statty, if you're using statties, that goes into the boxes of the business model canvas can be treated as a big hairy assumption, right? And further than that, actually, if you look at the post-its themselves, those post-its might actually equate to multiple assumptions or multiple hypotheses that you're making, which means that you could run dozens and dozens of experiments around just one post-it note in the business model canvas. And obviously, the business model canvas is just a tool for business modeling, right? So it doesn't tell you how to actually go about testing those assumptions. And so for doing that, we use customer development and lean startup principles and techniques, and in order to actually validate or invalidate the various post-it notes that are going onto the business model canvas. So that's one way. The business model canvas in and of itself can be used as in design thinking. I mean, it's one of the big pieces of a design thinking is visualization, right? And the business model canvas as a tool is meant to be visual. It's meant to help you to iterate and to change things. It's meant to stay fluid. That's why we use post-it notes. In our workshops, we use a lot of design thinking techniques in terms of prototyping and iterations and getting feedback early and often, and all those various types of things. So the business model canvas was crafted and designed using design thinking principles from the outset. I don't know if you've read the book, you've seen that it was kind of co-authored, and the art production was all done by Alan Smith, who's just a phenomenal, brilliant designer, and is well versed in design thinking techniques. And everything that we do at Strategizer and with our tools, the business model canvas and now the value proposition canvas, is done with design thinking in mind. And we utilize all those techniques in our workshops and in our consulting and all of the things that we do. Beyond Lean Startup, I mean, Lean Startup obviously takes a lot of its foundations from lean manufacturing and agile engineering in and of itself. So already you've got kind of components of agile engineering built in to customer development and Lean Startup frameworks, which we use to test and validate or invalidate the assumptions around our business model. So I think that there's kind of this, I mean, they're all very synergistic. They're all meant to be complementary, and by nature, there's kind of pieces and components of each of these methodologies already built into each other, just because of how they were conceived.
Got it. Yeah, that helps. I think early on, when you're first learning a lot of these things, it gets really confusing, the number of different possible tools and techniques and frameworks and that kind of stuff. So just understanding that that they're complementary, and it's not necessarily that you must use one before the other or those types of things, I think is really valuable to help people with
and
getting up to speed.
That's actually something we're going to be touching on in the Value Proposition Canvas book, is that when you're working on an innovation project or a strategy project, a lot of people think that you've got to start in one place, but in reality, that's not how innovation happens, right? Innovation can happen because of something that happens with a customer, and that's where we assume it should happen, right? Starting with a very customer-centric approach. But oftentimes, innovation happens because of something that we've conjured up in a lab or in one of our R&D centers. It happens because of political action that takes place, and so therefore we have to change various components of our business. Or or maybe a channel partner gets bought up by another company or goes out of business, or there's all sorts of various things that influence the way that we innovate within an organization. And so when you start looking at methodologies and frameworks and where should I start, there's really no right place to start. You start with where you're at, and you use the tool that's right for where you're at that time. And then it's kind of going to be a consistent back and forth between all of these various things as you're learning things, as you're getting out of the building, and as you're working with customers, and as you're working with partners and various stakeholders within your business. There's going to be a constant back and forth between, okay, let's go back and update our business model canvas, or let's go create a new customer persona or customer profile. Let's go, we need to go out and we need to do more testing via lean and customer development. We need to use agile engineering techniques to incorporate the feedback and the things that we need to iterate on within our product or within our service that we're developing. So there's not really a right place to start or a right tool to use per se. Just that, and I guess this is kind of one of the tenets of Kanban, right? Is start with where you're at. Start with where you're at, and use the tool that's right for the task.
Yeah, that's great advice. Oftentimes when you're first learning something, you look for a specific process, and unfortunately, there's not always that in place. So, you got to kind of use what you can get your hands on. One thing before I ask the next question, I just want to note to all the folks that are viewing live, if you have any questions or any things that you'd like for Benson or I to talk about, please feel free to post that either in the chat in the Google Hangout or in the event comments, or tweet at us any of those channels. I'm not sure how you got here, but for those of you that use different channels, feel free to hit us in any of those. You'll notice my eyes darting over to the other screen as I try to check to see if there's anything over there. So feel free to ask questions, and we'll be happy to try to answer them. So back to Benson. I think that that Intel example is a wonderful example of a way to use the business model canvas besides just in a startup or in a new initiative just documenting or jotting down some hypotheses and then running off to test them. What are some other creative ways that you've seen the business model canvas used in the enterprise?
So we've seen it used. Oh my gosh, there's a number of different ways it's been used. So obviously strategy, innovation work. We've seen people use it as kind of a dashboard, so to speak. So people will map out their business models, and then they'll tie their key performance indicators or KPIs to the various building blocks of the business model canvas, and then they'll kind of use the canvas as the framework or the dashboard for kind of monitoring those KPIs and how they interact with each other in the business model. We've seen people use it to understand their competition better. So they'll take the business model canvas and they'll map out all their, at least the core competitors in their space. We've also seen them do that to understand their customers better. So one really interesting project, actually that I worked on with Intel before this strategy project, was they had a critical customer that they were working with on a new project, and they couldn't quite figure out how to work well together or what the right way was to work together. And so what we did is we mapped out the business model of this specific team at Intel and the product that they were producing, and then we mapped out the business model of the customer, and then they actually came together in a room together to conduct a 2-day workshop on this, which was really cool to involve a customer in your strategy process, which I don't think I've seen that very often. So Intel actually paid for the customer to come in and get business model training so that they could align with their customer's business model in terms of both producing this product and as well as going to market with it. I mentioned creating portfolios of business models and kind of seeing the business model hierarchy of sorts. We've seen people kind of implement it as a new idea template. So to institutionalize the canvas, basically any new idea that gets submitted for funding or to receive additional heads on the project, you have to use a business model canvas to communicate to whoever the decision-making board is, whether that's management or some other teams of individuals that you have to pitch to. But they actually use the business model canvas as the template for communicating what that new idea is going to look like and feel like, and kind of communicate how that fits back in with the overall business model of that business unit or of that division or higher organization. So a lot of different ways. Oh, one last way that I think is really interesting is we've seen this used in the finance teams and specifically mergers and acquisitions, as well as exit strategy and IPO type stuff. So essentially what a team will do is when they're looking to either acquire or be acquired by another organization, they'll map out it's very similar to what I was talking about with mapping out either the competitor or the customer, but basically they'll map out the business model of the acquiring organization or the organization that they're trying to acquire, and basically 1 + 1 should equal 3, right? And so if when we combine these business models, is it going to work or is it not going to work? Are there too many differences between our business models that this is just going to create a lot of issues? And obviously there's more to consider in a merger or acquisition scenario than just the business model, but that's one really interesting way that we've seen it used for finance or investment purposes.
Those are great examples. One of the things that I saw at Intuit and actually that I was sort of championing and trying to push teams toward doing, which is for functional teams like IT or finance or HR, those types of groups, actually treating what they're doing as a business or as a product or a service, right? And so using the business model canvas to have those teams actually document what is the product or service that you're offering. Your customer happens to be other employees, but oftentimes those teams tend to think that their product or service is for all employees and must be for all employees. And actually, it's typically ends up being for a subsegment, and helping them think through that subsegment ended up being really, really valuable, as well as understanding what the financial impact and cost is to those products and services that they offer. Have you seen any examples like that? Any that stand out?
Yeah, and I can't specifically name and call out the organization.
That's all right.
But yes, the tool can be used just as well internally as it can externally. We've seen teams, just like you said, so functional teams will get together and they'll kind of map out, what is our business model within this company? Who are our various internal customers? How do we go about reaching those internal customers? What are the channels that we're using? What are the types of relationships that we have to keep and maintain and grow with these internal customers? What is our revenue model, if there is one? So that kind of takes care of the value side. And then on the infrastructure side, obviously, who are our key partners in our business, whether that's management or another functional group, or whatever. What are the critical resources that we require, and what are the key activities that we've got to perform, and what's our own cost structure? So it's like I said, you can see that it can be used just as well internally as it can externally with customers or competitors, or if you're trying to bring a new product or service to market.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, here's an organization, actually, now that I'm talking about it, that I can bring up, MasterCard. So we did a big project with MasterCard where they rolled out the business model canvas and the value proposition canvas in a really big way. So what we did is we created a 5-week online course, and they first rolled it out to all of their product managers. So they trained some 250 or 300 product managers in using this 5-week online course in the business model and value proposition canvases. And so these product managers use the tool, obviously, for their various products and services that they're in charge of, but also once they got beyond product management, they started working with finance and with HR and with the marketing teams and rolling out this tool. And what got really interesting is now that the product managers have their tools in place, or have this tool in place to kind of map out the business model of their individual products, then they could go, and then once the other functional units had their business models mapped out, it became really easy for them to go back and forth between each other and to basically compare models and say, hey, this is what we need from you, and this is why it's important to us, and here's how it fits back into your team's business model and what you're doing within the organization. Here's why you should help us, basically. So when you start training so many various pieces of your organization in this tool and in this framework, like I said, it just becomes the common thread, or the common language that everybody starts using to speak to each other. And something that you and I were talking about yesterday, Aaron, is that where typically you'll see somebody in their functional role, and all they see is kind of what's happening in their own little silo, right? If I'm a marketing person, all I ever see is marketing, and what's the phrase, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, exactly, or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And essentially,
all you've got is a hammer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you've got in these siloed organizations. But when everybody starts using the business model canvas as the framework to talk strategy, to talk business models, to talk go to market, to talk about customers and competitors, it becomes really interesting because everybody all of a sudden is on the same page, right? It's like we understand each other now, mm-hmm. and it makes sense why we should help each other rather than just helping our own internal teams within our own little silos.
Yeah, that ability to drive alignment is huge inside any large organization. It's just there's so many people trying to accomplish so many different things that that alignment can really break down a lot of barriers.
Absolutely.
So in the example, in that example where they were training all these product managers and they were able to communicate better and those kinds of things, were there any issues that they ran into?
Oh yeah, I mean tons and tons of issues.
Any
Uh,
worth noting?
yeah, absolutely. And this is and actually this I'll just share some of the common issues that that we come up with or that we see and kind of how to address them. And this is from hundreds and hundreds of organizations. Actually, Strategizer recently commissioned a research report to be done on the various organizations that are using the business model canvas, and we interviewed thousands of people, and so the range of organizations from government government groups to nonprofits to traditional startups to universities to our really big corporations. We got a ton of really phenomenal feedback. So some of the big issues that most people come up with is whenever you try to bring in a new tool or a new methodology to an organization, you're going to immediately get pushback, right? Because so first of all, there's most large enterprises. It's kind of like tool and method overload, right? It seems like every 2 or 3 years a new tool comes out or a new method or new process or framework is available, and you get some champion user within the organization who's trying to lead the charge, and there's always pushback, right? Nobody wants to change their ways and their habits, and they just want to do business as usual. So there's going to be pushback, but and I talked about that champion user. That champion user is actually really critical to the success of being able to have a new tool like the business model canvas or even lean startup or agile engineering permeate the rest of the organization. And something that champion user can do is not just work kind of grassroots bottom up, but also go top down and try to get C-level sponsorship and support. So we find that the teams that implement and use the business model canvas the best have both a bottoms up and a top down approach. So the C-suite and your VPs and stuff obviously don't have time to oversee the process of implementing the business model canvas or lean startup or whatever else in an organization. So they need those grassroots champions to be able to make this type of stuff happen. But often just by having some type of formalized statement of support for the new tool or the new method, it goes really, really far. Also, a lot of times I see trouble because there's no sense of urgency behind why we should be adopting this new method or this new tool. So when I mentioned the Intel scenario where, hey, we've got to hit 25% CAGR in the next 3 to 5 years, right? That's a sense of urgency, right? We have a need that we're not going to be able to satisfy in the next 3 to 5 years unless we do something different. And this could be the tool that could help us to get there. So having some reason why you need to use a new tool is often very, very helpful. Another problem that we see is a lot of people want to take on a new tool in a really big way, like we saw at MasterCard. Now MasterCard was kind of a different animal because they just had phenomenal executive support, and also they had a number of people that had already been out to some of our public workshops and master classes, and so they had both the top and the bottom up approaches already in place, and so they were able to roll out the business model canvas in a really big way. But oftentimes it's more important just to start simple, right? Just to, like I said, just start with just start using it as the tool that has to be used for communicating new ideas. Right, that was a really simple way that we saw in an organization to get people to just start thinking about the business model canvas. Even if they didn't know how to use it correctly, at least they had seen it, right? And at least people could say, hey, you know, this is kind of a really interesting tool. I've never used it before. Let me go learn more about it, right? And so just starting simple. There's all sorts of ways to do that, obviously, but that was, you know, one very specific way that we saw. Just one last one that I think is really critical is that when you don't know how to use the tool and you just try to do it on your own, inevitably you're likely to struggle, right? You're going to kind of putter along trying to use the tool for a long time until finally you just get frustrated and either you give up or you give in to letting other people help you. And my suggestion is, rather than, you know, sputtering along for a while, just get outside help from the get-go. Go find expert facilitators, expert users, practitioners that are really familiar with the tool that you're trying to implement and use, whether, like I said, whether it's the business model canvas or lean startup or design thinking. Find that expert user, that practitioner, that consultant, bring them in to help you and your team, because you're going to get a lot farther faster, and they're going to be able to open your eyes to some of the various challenges that you're going to come up with along the way, and basically set you up for success rather than yourself doing it on your own, setting yourself up for failure. So those are some of the big, those are some of the big challenges that we see, and some of the ways that I think you can combat them.
Got it. That's awesome. So we're coming close to the end. There we go. That's the right way to say it. So we're going to shift just a little bit from business model canvas over to Benson. So Benson, for you personally, what are you up to next?
So, like I mentioned, I do some consulting work on the side. Right now, I'm working with a number of different enterprise clients that are really interesting, and I've got a lot of work going on there right now. One thing I didn't mention, though, is that I kind of got my start at the beginning of my career in working with startups. I worked on a couple of startups myself, and then from there I went to work in a startup incubator at Arizona State University, and within that incubator I was part of a few core teams that designed some new accelerator programs. And so one of the things that's got me really interested right now is can we apply the traditional accelerator concept to large enterprises, and more specifically, not just like what Techstars is doing with basically taking their accelerator and doing it internally at an organization, or even externally where other people come and use, like the Nike API, right? If you're familiar with what's going on there, Techstars has come in and basically run an accelerator with Nike, but it's still a traditional startup accelerator. The only difference is that the startups have to focus on creating new products and services around Nike's API, right? So, not talking about stuff like that. What I'm really interested in doing is, can we accelerate corporate spinouts? And I think that there's a lot of reasons why that's interesting to me, and why I think that's a interesting possibility. But what's got me excited right now is thinking about how do we accelerate the success of a new product or technology that's been spun out of a large enterprise, and how do we bring that new technology to into commercialization.
Yeah, it does sound interesting. Definitely a lot of companies dabbling in that space and looking at all of the different ways that they can commercialize their ideas. So I think I think from our discussions previously and that kind of stuff, it definitely seems like there's something interesting in that space, and I wish you the best of luck with pursuing that.
Yeah.
So.
Me too. I wish myself the best of luck. I'm not sure how it's all going to shape up, but
that's how it goes, right?
Interested and excited.
Yeah, exactly. So, if folks that are watching this want to be able to connect with you, what are the best ways for them to do so?
You can reach out. I'm on social media. One of the nice things about having a unique name like Benson Garner is I basically own myself on the internet. So you can find me on just about any social media channel, and the username is just going to be my name, Benson Garner. You can reach out to me via my website, bensongarner.com. Email me at benson@bensongarner.com. There's any number of ways that you can reach out and get in touch with me. Um, but there you have it. I'm on social media. You've got my email address, and you know my website.
Very cool. Thank you. Appreciate that. And thank you very much for spending this time with us. I hope that folks got something valuable out of it. I know I did personally. So I'm excited to see how people apply these things. One other note, so if you did find something valuable from this, please, if you're on YouTube, like the video on YouTube for us, help us get some additional eyeballs for later, or share this on Twitter or whatever your platform of choice is. Our next Lean Lunch is going to be on June the 6th, same time, 10 a.m. Pacific. We're actually going to try something just a little bit different on the next one. We're going to change the format up a little. We're going to have the interview at the beginning with our guest be just a little bit shorter. We'll do probably about 30 minutes there, and then we'll spend the latter portion of the segment doing what we're calling Coach's Corner. So the host, probably me, as well as the guest, we'll have an intrapreneur or an entrepreneur in some enterprise join us for the Coach's Corner. They'll share what they're working on, and then we'll actually conduct live coaching with them on the call, so all of you can learn from that as well. So really excited about trying that out on the 6th. So please join us then. And if you'd like to have your idea be the one that we're helping out in coaching, please get a hold of us, and we'd love to talk to you about that. So there's no cost for that. We're just doing that to try to help out the community and help folks sharpen their skills. So once again, thank you, Benson. Really appreciate you spending your time with us this morning, and best of luck on your enterprise spin-out accelerator.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. Talk to you soon. Bye, guys.